Hi guys, today going to be making a snowy campfire for a D&D session. To start with, getting some foam core and tracing the rough elements that I want to build later on. So this is going to be 2 tents and a lean-to with a campfire in the middle, using this tea light as a basis for the LED. Then we're going to trim the foam core into an ovular shape and then bevel the edges. Then cut out the tea light in the centre and push to make sure that fits in. Now here the tea light is too tall for my use, so I'm going to pop the bottom off and have a look at the internals. So inside it's got a much lower profile, but it actually needs the case to push the switch down and make contact with the pins. So this can be easily remedied by adding a spare piece of plastic on top of it. I had some plasticard lying around. And it's worth keeping the case, might be useful later on. So cutting out a rectangle of plasticard, and then trimming it down to fit. And then gluing it on with super glue. And this will also protect it a little bit from any flock or debris getting in the battery later on. So there we can see it's a much lower profile and sits more easily in the base, but still a little too high, so adding an extra ring of foam core to bring that base height up. Next we're going to build the lean-to, so we're going to trim a few lengths of balsa wood and grab some coffee stirrers. We want to make 2 V shapes and then a cross beam for the center. So we want to cut those at a slant so they sit flush with the beams. And then we want to connect them. Next, trim the coffee stirrers down to size. And glue the brackets onto the base with hot glue. Then build up the planks on the back of the lean-to using the coffee stirrers. Then finally, I'm going to trim another length of balsa wood, bevel it slightly using a knife, and then attach that as a cross beam on the front. Next, mix up some Sculptamod. I wasn't too happy with the Sculptamod on this project. It took about 3.5 days to dry. And then I had to remove some elements when they weren't connected to it successfully. But giving a coating all over with the Sculptamod to give it a lumpy texture to the base. It's really useful when making snow because it kind of emulates that kind of bluff effect that you get with snow mounds. It tends to not quite melt, but have a very soft appearance once it's cured and it's kind of sagged down a bit. You can always go over later with a wet finger and smooth it down if you want to. To give the LED a bit more protection, grabbed the circle that I trimmed out at the beginning, drilled a hole in the middle using a sculpting tool. Then I trimmed one side of the base down and glued it onto the LED. And then put some more sculptor mode over the top of that. Then, grabbing some flock, mix up a roughly 1-to-1 mix with PVA. And this is going to be where the ground snow has melted and you can see the earth underneath. So I'm going to put this underneath the lean-to, around the campfire and leading to the 2 tents on the right hand side. It's a very useful trick for building up texture and filling any gaps in the base. And while it's still wet, I'm pushing a circle of small pebbles around the LED to make the stones surrounding the campfire. And then placing a few others just here and there to be ground stones. Next, grabbing some more Lensa balsa, going to put the tent poles in. So we're going to have one kind of slouch tent and then one generic V-shaped tent. And also grabbing some glass stones, going to use these as large chunks of ice. Now, I actually end up removing these shortly as they don't stick to the sculptor mold because it wasn't quite dry at this point. But moving on, I'm going to grab some small offcuts of balsa wood and attach them together in a pyramid shape to make the campfire. So using a blob of hot glue at the top, that's going to be mostly hidden. We just go around poking the small twigs into the top bit. It's not the most realistic looking campfires, but in terms of D&D, that seems to be the typical. Then, trimming the feet down to size with a pair of clippers so they sit flush to the campfire base. Then, grabbing some watered down black paint, we're going to go over where we want the ground to show through in the snow. We're going to hit all the areas we flocked. We're going to start with a watered down black, then we're going to add brown, make it into a dark brown and hit the wood beams as well as the tent poles. Now, this doesn't need to be too clean because a lot of it's going to be covered with snow effects later. So you can get away with a few mistakes here. So, adding some black and kind of orangey mid-brown, I'm going to mix that together to a dark brown and go over the wood beams, as well as hitting some of the highlights on the dirt. Then, grabbing a good amount of white paint, I'm going to mix that with some more brown, and that's going to form our highlight for our ground layer. So we're going to brush that all over where the dirt is. Then we're going to let that fully dry before we move on to the next step. So to create the tents, we're going to grab some kitchen roll and we're going to water down some PVA quite heavily, maybe 3 parts water to 1 part PVA. And we're going to dunk the kitchen roll into this liquid and then we're going to shape it over the tent poles. This can be a very fiddly step, but it's worth it in the end. So cutting roughly into the shapes of the tents, we're going to dip them fully into the PVA mixture, and then trying to keep the shape from sticking to itself, we're going to spread that over and pat it down onto the poles. Then with a rectangular piece for the kind of generic tent shape, I'm going to place that over, try and crimp the back, and then if there's any excess, just trim that with a pair of scissors. It's also worth doing multiple layers to get a bit of structural integrity, and it can add to the sort of ragged look of the tents. If you want like a more savage looking tent, you can just use multiple kind of torn strips to be animal hide. I'm going for kind of a mix of both looks here, but again, a lot of it's going to be covered by snow effects, so we're not going to actually see much of the tent underneath, which is why I'm not bothered about the texture on this kitchen roll. So grabbing some watered down brown paint, just going to lightly dab over the top. They will wilt if they get too wet, so you don't want to be too heavy-handed with this step. Then, grabbing our snow effects, we're going to put a base layer down, which is going to be the flock mixed with the PVA. And we want this to be about 1:1 mixed ratio, because we want it to be quite strong. I wasn't convinced that the sculptor mod was doing a great job, so this is also going to act as a sealant for that layer and give it a bit more strength. So we want to mix together until it's about buttercream texture, and then give a good thick layer over the entire base. And we want to try and give like a bit of a foot between where the snow's melted and the outside, to kind of show the build-up of snow over time. Make sure you hit the top of the lean-to and the top of the ice boulders that I've now replaced. And watering it down slightly, we're going to go over the tents as well. But make sure you cover the base with the thicker layer. So once that's all dry, we're going to grab a light grey paint and hit these stones around the campfire in the middle. If you want to be extra, you can grab some black paint and put it on the inside face of the rocks to show where the soot build-up is. And there we have the first layer of the snow effects dried. We got a really nice effect on the tent. So that was the same mixture we used all over, but slightly thinned down with some more water. And that's just giving it a really nice kind of moderate snowfall on the sides of the tent. So going with some watered down PVA again, we're going to paint over the entire thing, apart from on top of the campfire. But this is going to be the kind of fluffier, lighter snowfall on top. And you get a really good effect by using the mix of the PVA and the flock, and then going over it again with just the PVA, then the flock layered on top. Because you get the denser snowfall underneath, and then the kind of newly fallen snow on top. So yeah, really liking the snow flock. It's not the cheapest, but you get a ridiculous amount for your money. And just go all over. We can always shake the excess off and put it back in the bottle later. Now underneath I've got a piece of foam core with a sit on the back, so that folds in two. So I can just fold that up, all the flock will go in the middle, and I can pour it directly back into the bottle. Little sneaky trick for you there. And there we have it. A D&D campfire for Rime of the Frost Maiden with a working LED campfire. Really like the tea light in this one, it's got a nice little flicker to it. But thanks for watching guys, I'll catch you next time.